This is SelfWork, and I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford. At SelfWork, we'll discuss psychological and emotional issues common in today's world and what to do about them. I'm Dr. Margaret, and SelfWork is a podcast dedicated to you taking just a few minutes today for your own self-work. Hello and welcome to SelfWork. I'm Dr. Margaret Rutherford, a clinical psychologist, and I wanted to extend the walls of my practice to many of you. Maybe you're already in therapy and you're enjoying that kind of relationship, but you're interested in hearing another viewpoint, or maybe even, as I hear a lot of people do, bringing self-work topics into your own session. Wanted to reach those of you who might be looking for answers. You've just been diagnosed with something, or you're having relationship issues, or just life issues that you're not sure what to do with. But also to a third group of you, those of you who are pretty darn skeptical about mental health treatment and think that really reaching out for it is weak or means you're fragile. Just give SelfWork a listen, and I think you might change your mind. Before we get to a very, very poignant interview, here's a quick message from Mag Breakthrough. If you don't want to accidentally take a laxative and have the worst day of your life, listen to this. If you're currently taking a magnesium supplement, chances are you're flushing it down the toilet, and I mean that literally. You see, the most common type of magnesium is actually used as a laxative. So if you're taking it, you're literally pooping and peeing it out. Kind of ironic, isn't it? The worst part about magnesium deficiency is how it affects almost every aspect of your health. Your metabolism suffers, you can't lose weight, your blood pressure goes up, and a whole lot more. And the worst part, as we've talked about, is your sleep suffers. So what's the solution? It's called Magnesium Breakthrough, and it's my favorite magnesium product that I continue to recommend. It's the only full-spectrum magnesium supplement with 7 unique forms of magnesium that your body can actually absorb. And this month, they're including free bottles of their full line of digestive health products on select orders while supply lasts. That means you're getting free products to try that will support your digestive system. Now, this special offer is only available at magbreakthrough.com/selfwork. That's magbreakthrough.com/selfwork. And you got to enter the code SelfWork10 for 10% off any offer. So free product and 10% off. Try it. I'm so delighted to bring you this interview in recognition of Suicide Awareness Month here in September. Why? Erin Gallagher is going to tell you about the life and suicidal death of her son, Jay. His life was ended when the school had been alerted there were warning signs, big ones, very alarming ones. But because he didn't seem depressed and denied it when they interviewed him, they ignored these signs. They didn't dig any further than Jay saying, "No, I'm not depressed." Erin has poured herself into learning more about why this school counselor didn't search further, why Jay was believed so readily. Our paths met because of my work in perfectly hidden depression. Her discoveries that she'll share with you today are achingly true. Even those who've sought therapy don't report suicidal thoughts. Often they just don't. Maybe they're afraid, they fear stigma, they fear what might happen. Maybe their own denial is very active, but it's being challenged day in and day out by intrusive thoughts of dying or taking their own life that can invade even the most perfect seeming of lives. If you've listened to SelfWork, you know I am passionate about this topic. But today, please listen and listen with care. Take care of yourself. I am honored to be Erin's friend, and I greatly respect what she and her husband have done and are doing about Jay's death and how it occurred and what we can learn from it. This is what Erin says about herself. Erin is proud to be a part of the This Is My Brave team as interim executive director. Following the suicide of her son Jay in 2016, she and her husband became passionate mental health advocates and have worked tirelessly to influence policy on appropriate responses, particularly in the public schools, to suicide warning signs. She enjoys working with This Is My Brave volunteers toward ending the stigma associated with mental health and substance abuse disorders in honor of Jay. When Erin is not working, she enjoys spending time at her alma mater, James Madison University, visiting her oldest daughter, Lindsay, who is currently a senior majoring in nursing, and she also loves logging hours with her husband, Tim, while watching fast-pitch softball played by her youngest, who is now a freshman at Mount St. Mary's University in Emmitsboro, Maryland. She's got a full family life, and I so appreciate her taking the time away from This Is My Brave. And by the way, we're going to feature This Is My Brave a little later, and her family to talk with us on SelfWork. There's one more sponsor that wants your attention before we go on, and it's our newest sponsor, Ozark Mountain Medicine's CBD products. I've used them for over 3 years and hope that they can help whatever chronic pain or discomfort you might have. I know they have helped me every week. Diagnosed with degenerative disc in my back when I was in my 20s, I've long been a seeker of alternative ways to help reduce inflammation, and I can't believe that the best product I've ever found is produced here in Northwest Arkansas. Ozark Mountain Medicine, located on a small boutique farm in the Ozark Mountains under the careful watch of CBD guru Bill Morgan, is a grassroots operation which produces some of the highest quality CBD available on the market. Unlike marijuana, which contains THC, which is what makes it mood-altering, CBD isn't the same and is legal in all states. Ozark Mountain Medicine's products contain at least 16 varieties of hemp, where other CBD products may use only one. Think of it as a healing gumbo for your joint and muscle aches, and you've got the picture. What's most important to me and to you is that it works. I've been told at least 3 times in my life that I needed to be reassessed for back surgery, and 3 times I've kept walking, getting massages, and for the last 3 years, steadfastly using this product. You can take it orally in tincture form, or calming salves are available, which is what I prefer. The other benefits of taking it include immune support, increased relaxation, reduced anxiety, and improved sleep. So here's their fabulous offer for SelfWork listeners. All you have to do is use this promo link, ozarkmountainmedicine.com/selfwork, and you'll receive 10% off your order. I never suggest a product to you that I haven't used myself, and I reap this one's benefits each and every day. That code again is ozarkmountainmedicine.com/selfwork. Sometimes the best solutions are right under your nose. So try a bit of Ozark Mountain Medicine CBD and see for yourself. Now I want to introduce to you Erin Gallagher. I wanted you on SelfWork for many reasons. And one of them, of course, is your son Jay's death and how it happened and what you learned from it. So I know you're several years down the road, but at the same time, I'm sure it stays incredibly fresh. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a sad story, and I'll cry for a little bit in the beginning, but I can rally. So Jay was my oldest child, my only son, and incredibly smart, funny, really funny, just bright, observant, he just really unique personality. He was growing into such a great young man with hopes and dreams, obviously. He was a senior in high school. He was active in school. He was engaged in the classroom. He, was on the varsity golf team. He played on the club hockey team. He was, in the engineering club.
Everything that would indicate to you that he loved his life, that he loved where he was going with it, that he was creating something that he was participating fully in, and part of y'all's family, very vital part of your family and his friends.
Yeah. And I would say that now looking back, I can see things, and this is where some of your insight has been helpful. He did live a perfectionist lifestyle, and I do. I mean, I have, and obviously things have changed a lot since his death, but I grew up, and my family, it's kind of like perfectionism is the standard. And I've always said, it's not like I'm perfect, right? But I hold perfection as the standard. And then I'm disappointed when I don't hit it, which is obviously I'm human, so I never hit
Never hit it.
perfectionism. So I just walk around disappointed a lot, right? So I've tried to shake that obviously in recent years, and I see the fault in that line of thinking, especially now. But for Jay, he really he had that same standard for himself. So, for example, when he was applying for college, in the beginning of his senior year, he wanted to be in an engineering program, and so he stretched himself. He did the thing that they tell you to do, aim for your stretch school, that go for the school. Then the second option would be the one that you have a pretty good chance of getting into, and then explore some creative options that you definitely are your, the safety school thing, right? I mean, I don't want to say that, but, there's no guarantees these days about college, right? So he'd done that. He pushed himself to apply to Purdue University, and we're in Virginia, so that was a kind of a big deal. Mm-hmm. He was applying at Virginia Tech, and then we were exploring some other options, like up and coming engineering programs, that he, I think, would be a strong candidate for, and that those schools would have loved to have had him there. So one thing he said when he was applying to Purdue is, I don't think that they'd take a kid like me. And I said, well, you got to put yourself out there. I mean, maybe they won't, but, I think you're extremely bright. You're thoughtful. You bring a lot to the table. Mm-hmm. And I think you're underestimating yourself. Mm-hmm. So he applied. And then, he got that response back. He didn't have to wait super long. So I don't know how they do their admission there, but he got back within 6 weeks an acceptance into the Purdue engineering program.
Wow.
And then his comment was, "Oh, I guess they'll just take anybody there." And I was like, "Hey, you can't have it both ways. You can't think I'm not good enough and then go, oh, well, I guess they'll just let anybody into this program," So it was that kind of thinking, that always that self-doubt. But I think it was based in perfectionism. So we would coach him a lot on that, really try to highlight for him, that's, you can't think like that, obviously it was plaguing him in a far greater way than we ever could have imagined, but we never knew that was a risk factor, that never elevated in our eyes to something that could be dangerous for him. That never really crossed our minds, so
that kind of pressure, or that kind of,
right.
Do you feel like he felt as if he would be he'd be an imposter there, that he'd be found out?
Maybe I unfortunately, we didn't have the opportunity to explore this with him. So I can only guess what his answers would be, just knowing what I know of him. But in any case, it was early in 2016, in February, actually, that, he took his own life. Which was a complete shock to us. I mean, we just had no idea, no thought whatsoever that this is where he was emotionally.
No one did, except for the one friend you told me about. Let me share a little of the backstory with SelfWork listeners about how we came to know one another. I was at the time researching for my book on perfectly hidden depression, and I had simultaneously, didn't have anything to do with that, reached out to Jennifer Marshall, who was the co-founder of This Is My Brave. But then she contacted me, I don't know, sometime after that, and told me about you. And I read your blog and about Jay, and I reached out to you, I think, or vice versa. I'm not sure which. And then we began talking, and I have, there's some factors about Jay's death. And at the time, back in 2016, you couldn't go into it much because of litigation. Can you go into that any more than you did before, or? Yeah,
I mean, I can tell you as much as I've been able to ascertain. I don't know that I'll ever know the complete story, unfortunately. But Jay certainly was actually giving off signs that he was in distress, just not outwardly to us. He had his happy face on when he was in our family and with us. But he was sharing with a friend on phone calls and through text that he was struggling, and that he and maybe actually more than one friend, but one friend in particular who started to become very alarmed by the things that he was saying. And so in January, she felt like she needed to tell someone that he seemed like he was getting worse. And it felt to her like it was mounting. Sorry.
It's all right. And I think it's important to say, as I've found with a lot of these people who are struggling with this, she wasn't a local friend.
No.
She wasn't someone who knew you.
Right.
She wasn't, it was almost like she was safe to talk to.
Yes.
Because she wasn't in his local or in his everyday life.
Right. Right. So she didn't have the opportunity to see us as a family. So, he did paint a picture to her that he was having trouble with us. Mm-hmm. So, certainly, obviously, the thing about an 18-year-old, developmentally, they kind of have to start to, I think it's normal for them to want to, they know they're going to be leaving the nest
away, to find fault. Yeah.
Right. So they kind of have to create a scenario where like, tensions are mounting and this is a horrible place to live. I got to get out of this place. Right. So maybe that's what he was doing. I'm not sure. We didn't feel that tension. We weren't having arguments in our house. We weren't having knockdown, drag out, blowouts, where he would leave the house storming, storm out of the house. Or, there was nothing like that. I mean, simmering beneath, I guess. But we just, we didn't have that kind of, culture in our home. So maybe we were relying too much on like everything's fine, and maybe that was a little toxic. That's something we have to probably think about and examine. Mm-hmm. But anyway, this friend had definitely observed and was becoming concerned, and so she wanted to let somebody know. The trusted adult thing.
Exactly.
We have thanked her time and time again. I know she's been tortured by this because she did do the right thing. She reached out. She actually went to the extent of like looking through his social media and trying to figure out like what school he went to, and then identifying that school, and then going through the trouble of trying to figure out who his school counselor would be based on the assignments that were listed on the website, alphabetically.
Wow.
And so she figured out who his counselor was and reached out to that counselor and said, I have a report I want to make about Jay Gallagher. And they had a brief exchange. She, I think, made herself very clear. It was something to the effect of, she said, I want to make a report. And he came back and said, well, tell me what you've got. Like, tell me what this is about. And she said, well, he's been talking of self-harm and suicide. And it's been going on for a while, but last night was especially concerning. And so, I think you can see from her email that it was, it articulated very clearly mounting distress and anguish. So he said, all right, I'll look into it. And so that was an after hours email that came to him about 6 p.m. on a Monday night. He eventually called Jay into his office on Tuesday afternoon. So I feel like he broke protocol there. The school system had a strong gold standard suicide prevention policy in place. This is not an issue of, now we know something and we better put something in place that will protect other students. Right. They had an excellent suicide prevention policy in place, and all counselors had been trained in that policy. He followed it very loosely, missed some significant steps. And one of the steps that they recommended in the policy is that if somebody a third party were to offer a warning about a student and their state of mind, that the person receiving that warning should go and gather as much information from that person as possible.
Right.
Not just a loose, like, yeah, tell me about it. Yeah. 3 sentences later, sure, I'll check in with him. He didn't do that. So he didn't have what we eventually got our hands on, which was like 80 pages of text,
Oh
but she
my
was very quick and could easily access. And it does paint a very distressing picture. If he'd asked for that, he would have seen right away that this wasn't a joke. This wasn't some kid saying something.
Over dramatizing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
He would have seen it all. It was all there.
Oh,
but he didn't ask for it.
Wow.
He didn't ask for it. So it would have been a simple ask. And she had it available just like that. But she felt like she'd done her due diligence, and he said he'd go talk to Jay about it. And he did eventually call him into his office on Tuesday afternoon, asked him, hey, somebody's made this report. Jay got angry and denied it, and wanted to know who'd made the report, who said such a thing about him. And I think that was a defensive, like, last-ditch effort to keep up the facade and not have to say this thing out loud that he was terrified to talk about. In her message, she said he wants help, but he doesn't know how to ask for it.
Exactly.
Those are her words.
Right.
And he, there was the chance. That was the moment. And he denied it. And I think that confirmed this bias that this counselor had. There's no chance it's Jay. No way that Jay would be suicidal. It doesn't make any sense. Right, exactly. And so as soon as he said, I'm not, he was like, great. I knew it. Send him back to class. And that's where it ended. Not ended,
so
that's
what
where
has
the
happened with the school district at this point?
I'm sorry?
What has happened in trying for them to, have they ever taken ownership of the responsibility for that? Never?
No. Jay died early February. So it probably wasn't until March that we got a letter from this young woman, who said something to the effect of, I was the one who alerted the counselor. And that made us think, like, what is she talking about? And so we asked somebody to reach out to her and find out what she could have been referring to. But in that interim period, we had gone to the school and said, like, was there like a failing grade that was coming through, or had anybody seen anything? And the resounding response was there were no signs. There were no signs.
So if she hadn't contacted you and let you know that she was the alert that they received, that they would have just denied everything. Oh my gosh, that is appalling. It's appalling.
It is. It's horrifying, really. And so we asked that the principal, when we learned of this, we said, we think that there's something more to this story, and we think you should go take a look. And she came back and said, I've asked everybody, don't have any further information. And then we were kind of at a loss. Like, what do we do now? Like, if we can't get the truth from an ordinary request for an inquiry, and we know what the truth is, where do we go next? So we did contact an attorney just to say, like, what next steps do we have at our disposal?
Well, I want you to hear me say quickly, as well as the audience who's listening, I can't tell you how many people, since I've begun writing about this, and certainly since the book came out, that have contacted me with similar stories about a child.
I hate it. That's horrible.
Spouse. And, suicide leaves you with so many questions anyway.
Yeah.
And then a suicide where you think, what did I not see? I mean, the feelings are so complicated. I mean, I don't even know the word to use.
It really actually, like, it pushed me to system overload. I mean, I was on the brink of imploding,
I'm not surprised.
There's so many things that you run through your head over and over and over again. I mean, I walked myself through to the morning that this was revealed to us. I walked myself through, like, desperately trying to, like, reshape history. It's like I don't know. If I could just
What's the domino I could pick up and none of this would happen? Mm-hmm.
And if I could just, that was the loop that ran in my head. Like, how can I change this outcome? Like, how can I fix it so this never happens? And, obviously there was a moment where I had to force myself to stop and really surrender to the reality that, and if there was something I could do, it was left undone. And we just had to do what we could, obviously, to make sure our family was okay. But also, we wanted to make sure that if the story that, had become clear to us could be shared. And obviously, it's a grieving mother's, it's such almost a trope. And but it, if I could help one person, right? If I could prevent another family from going through something like this, if I could forget the family, if I could prevent another young person from suffering in silence to the point of death, man, I mean, that's what I needed to do. Like, that is what I was committed to doing. Like, I don't want any other 18-year-old man or woman or 12-year-old child. I mean, can you imagine the numbers that we see now and the statistics that we know to be true, that the second leading cause of death for children ages 10 and above to up to like 24. But 10-year-olds, the second leading cause of death is suicide. Can you imagine a 10-year-old sitting in anguish and terror and finally coming to the decision that this is the only option they have? I mean, if talking about it can make sure that we can stop 10-year-olds from suffering, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 80-year-olds from suffering, like, let's do it. We're going to talk about it, When
it's by suicide and when it has the other component or the total perplexing facet of it wasn't obvious, there was no change. The magnitude of what was going on with that child was silent, at least to the people that could do something about it. So, I feel about talking with you like I felt about the parents who let Kate Fagan did a book, What Made Maddie Run, that came out back in 16 or 17. And it was about this college athlete, track athlete at Penn, I think Penn State or UPenn.
Yes.
Pennsylvania people would be mad at me for not knowing the difference.
I know. I think it was UPenn actually, but I because I saw something on your Instagram. Did you recently interview?
I've talked a lot about it.
Okay,
so,
yeah.
I would love to interview anyone. But, I feel the same way because there's this sense of, we all pray that we would find out or discover something either medically wrong with our child that would end their life, or psychically or emotionally wrong, or, but that doesn't happen all the time. You could hide and say, this is too complicated. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid Jay will be judged. And you're not, you're just walking in your own courage. And I so appreciate that and value and respect the hell out of it, actually.
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I when we started the inquiry, with the school, which eventually, grew into a full on lawsuit, which has since been resolved. I mean, maybe not the way I would have seen it resolved, but it has, it's been put to rest. But, I really just wanted to understand. I really just needed to know, like, how could someone who's in the position of protecting students make the decision in this case not to take further action? Like, what circumstances were present that made him feel like this is not one that I need to really pursue? I just really needed to understand the thought process. So I thought the inquiry would take us there. It didn't. It gave me some insight, maybe because I heard, we posed questions and answers were given. And so were they the complete internal dialogue of this person? No. So I had to kind of imagine what that could be. So I went on a little journey to do research. Obviously I started in my blog post learning about the term that you've coined, perfectly hidden depression. That was very helpful for me to understand that this is something that people face, that it wasn't a one-off with Jay, but that this is a very common reaction to, unfortunately, to depression, that it's not always worn on someone's sleeve. It's not always outward in terms of belligerence or drug abuse or hiding and staying in bed and unable to get up. It's not always about a breakdown in self-care and hygiene. All of those things that we're told are the telltale signs of a suicidal person. And Jay had none of that. So, reading your work and what you'd written at the time about it was very helpful to me to understand what that could look like. Mm-hmm. But then I went on to just kind of try to understand in an interaction with a person, if you're in a position to offer help to somebody who is suicidal, like a counselor and a student or a therapist and a patient, how does that go down? Like, is it always just like, I ask you if you're suicidal, and if you are, you say yes? Well, it turns out that's not always true. And so there are studies out there, and one in particular from Columbia University, where they interviewed 547 psychotherapy patients and asked them, like, how's it going in therapy? Like, are you always answering truthfully? And the answer is no, they are not. They're not even in therapy. So they've signed on to be in therapy, and they are asked about suicidal ideation. And that is one of the top things that people lie about in therapy. So that kind of, when I'm thinking about a suicide prevention protocol that's put together by a school, and they encourage the trusted adult, whether it's a counselor or a teacher, a school administrator, to ask the question point blank, are you thinking of suicide? And the wisdom is that if they are, they'll say yes. But actually the study reveals that they may in fact say no, and it's likely that they will. So if they say no, is it an automatic no, they're not suicidal? Or is it a no, I'm too afraid to say that I am right now?
Right. So, of course, the immediate response, and especially if the therapist is somewhat defensive, is to say, well, how am I supposed to know something if it's not told to me? And my answer to that is that you can't, obviously, none of us are mind readers. However, if you're aware that depression can look very different, and so you have expanded your definition of what depressive symptoms, or at least suicidal possibilities, are there. It's, a very simple way of saying it. This is an oversimplification. Is the question is not always, do you feel hopeless? Is, if you felt hopeless, do you think you would tell your therapist?
Yeah, that's the other thing. And I saw somebody else who said that if somebody says no in that line of questioning, they don't leave it at that and just move on to the next question. They actually start to paint a picture for the patient and say, when I look at the things that you're facing right now in your life, you have a lot on your plate. And so let's just say Jay's scenario, you have the stress of applying to college and trying to continue to uphold your grades as a senior, and thinking about transitioning out of your family home into this new environment. Other people I've seen in my practice who've had that much on their plate, that much stress on their plate, have told me that is stressful. It makes them feel depressed. And some have said that they are thinking of harming themselves, or they have said that it feels like too much and they want to find a way out.
Sure.
So I like that because
it normalizes it somewhat.
It normalizes, say, this other people who are facing things very similar to this have told me that it's too much. They can't handle it. So if that's, and then the person suggested you could leave the door open with the patient then and say, if that is you, if you ever get to that point, you can talk about it with me. I'm the person that you can talk about this through with. I'm the safe place where you can have this conversation. So, and then maybe even putting the question back, has this ever felt like too much to you? And then work your way up to that question. I mean,
exactly.
I feel like that's a really, it normalizes, it humanizes the experience. It lets the person know that it actually, people who feel mounting tension, it causes anguish and pain. And when that pain mounts to a point, the desire isn't, of course, to end their life, but to end that pain and that anguish, get away from that situation in some way.
So many people, when they come to therapy, they think if they're going to talk about wanting to hurt themselves, that the therapist is going to pick up the phone and call the police.
Yeah, that's what they said in that Columbia study. They said, why did you withhold? And they said, I didn't want to be immediately hospitalized.
Exactly. And that's not the case at all.
Right.
People don't understand that. And especially, younger people who don't have a lot of understanding of even what therapy can be, or what it certainly can help a person by being that safe place. And if someone is determined enough to kill themselves, they will. However, to have the conversation as openly and as transparently and as carefully, like you said, where you say, well, this would not be an odd thing for you to feel this way. There would be plenty of people who, given the circumstance that you are facing in your life, that you might feel this way, so that they feel like there's some sort of support and understanding rather than judgment.
Right. Yeah.
Or immediate action.
Right. Yeah. And then there's a path. Well, I don't know the steps, but you know the steps. And, So that I feel like would be so helpful. But that is not a conversation I think that can be done. I mean, no shade to school counselors, but they have a lot on their plate. That really needed to be, I think, handed off to a mental health professional.
I agree with you.
So the best way to have done that would have been to make a phone call home so that we could
involve y'all. Yeah, exactly.
But in the course of my research, then, of course, I learned about the study at Columbia, and that answered one part of the question. But the other part of the question is, he had in his hand information that I think was articulated very well. He wants help. This is the friend. He wants help, but he doesn't know how to ask for it. And he's been talking about it a lot, but last night was most alarming. I mean, that's, I think, more information that you would need to
it needed to be nuanced rather than just say, hey, do you feel this way?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even still, why did he accept Jay's answer that, no, I'm not suicidal? Why was he willing to accept that? I mean, now we know why Jay denied it in that moment. But why was the counselor willing to accept that? So I continued to do some research, and I found the work of Dr. Timothy Levine at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And he's done a lot of work on people's perception of whether the person they're talking to is speaking the truth. And this was all introduced to me, by the way, through, I have it right here, Talking to Strangers from Malcolm Gladwell. Yes. This is where I was reading this, and this is where Dr. Levine's work was highlighted. And pretty much the whole book that Malcolm Gladwell is talking about is that we're not as amazing at reading other people as we think we are. We give ourselves a lot of credit. Like, ooh, we are so, I'll look him in the eye and then I'll know if he's telling the truth. Right. And so, turns out, we all kind of function under a truth bias where we assume that in the absence of any overwhelmingly compelling information otherwise, we assume that what people are saying to us when they look us in the eye is true. Yeah. So that's the truth bias that we carry, that if a person looks us in the eye and says something, we assume it to be true. But Dr. Levine goes one step further and says, like, he actually in his studies would set up scenarios where things got more and more ridiculous, that the evidence was overwhelmingly, contradicting what the person themselves was saying.
Exactly.
And the people on the other side still believed what the person was saying, even in the face of all of this
contradictory evidence.
Yeah. And that's the definition really of his truth default theory, that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, we rely heavily on that truth bias. And that's all, of course, happening behind the scenes. This is like more subconscious, and our conscious mind thinks like, I'm going to look him in the eye. He's going to tell me, and I'm going to know whether he's lying or not. And in fact, we're not good at it. And that's what his study really revealed. And so that helped me to see, not to give the counselor a big pass, because he was trained in a protocol that he completely disregarded. But certainly what I really wanted to see come out of this is, I really wanted the school system to know, like to do an investigation, to understand how something like this could happen, so that they could make sure that they tweak their training to prevent another tragedy like this. Like I have a friend who does, she's an attorney in Pennsylvania, and she does a lot of work with did do a lot of work in domestic violence, and women's, like she helped as an attorney serve women who were in domestic violent situations and get them protective orders, help them get through those situations, keep their kids and themselves safe. So in her area, when they lose a woman in that area to domestic violence, she said it's very standard for them to kind of go, everybody who's involved in protecting the community, police officers, social workers, doctors, attorneys,
anybody who's involved in that process,
they go into like this war room, and it's really like a vault where, like, anything that is revealed in that space is not ever going to be held against anyone. But the point is that they put everything they knew about this woman on the table and try to figure out where the breakdown was. Could we have done better at responding to that 911 call we got? Or should we have whatever, X, Y, or Z, right? And then even if the woman wasn't on their radar, they're still in that war room, and they put all the information, and they say, we didn't have her we didn't know that this is somebody who is was dealing with an abusive husband or partner. Why didn't we know about her? They go to that degree, right? So I was looking for that. I really wanted this school system to kind of put it all for the sake of the safety of every other student in that school system. I wanted them to go into a war room and put everything they could possibly have known about this situation on the table, and then come out of that with lessons learned that they could apply to their policy that would make it so that no other student would ever have a situation like this again.
And I think, Erin, from what I know about it, and I think you would agree with this, they were so scared of being found at fault.
I guess, I don't know.
Stayed away from all that. And it sounds like what your friend's describing is a process where no one's looking for fault. Everyone's saying, what did we as a system miss?
Right.
What were the signs? And if she weren't on our radar, why not? If she was on our radar, what happened with that? I mean, it was just sort of a blow by blow kind of assessment of responsibility and of caring, but not of judgment and fault.
Right.
That doesn't do anybody any good. I mean,
right.
young woman is dead. So, I so agree with you that to try to take this kind of tragedy and learn from it and then use what you've learned. And I can hear through your tears that it's so devastating to you that did not happen necessarily with this particular school system, at least to an extent that you know about it or that was made public.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, maybe behind the scenes, sure. I mean, I have heard from teachers that I know that are still in the system that they see a difference in the way that in what they observe as a response to other threats. But I think it would have meant, obviously, it would have meant a lot to know that my son.
Your son's death did not go, it had a purpose. It had a sense of being a part of a change. Mm-hmm. Well, but I think it is. And I interviews like this, and I'm sure you've given others. I know you've spoken. How much of this is, you're also interim executive director now of This Is My Brave. And what kind of healing or what kind of forum have you used This Is My Brave? And maybe you ought to talk a little bit about what This Is My Brave is.
Suicide is a tricky topic, but first of all, to know that talking about suicide doesn't put the idea of suicide in anybody's mind. But talking about mental illness and the possibility that it could emerge, it could come up in your life. And so to think about mental illness the way that you would talk about health, like parents tell their children all the time, like, if you have a bellyache, make sure you tell mommy, or if you ever see a rash on your body, you have to tell mommy, right? But if you're ever feeling down and you don't look forward to doing the things that you normally love to do, right? You should tell mommy about that. Like, you should tell your parents that, wow, I'm just not enjoying the things that I used to. And of course, a 7-year-old is going to say that different than a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, but to kind of paint a picture that, we know you love playing with your friends after school. And if you ever feel like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to go out with and play after school with my friends, or I have this knot in my tummy that, I can't figure out why. I don't have a test coming up. But it's just there all the time. Like, these are things that you should ask your kids about, and they should be telling you about, and so, but make those conversations normal so that if a condition does start to emerge, they're comfortable coming to you to talk about it, and you're comfortable with the idea that it could be happening in your child's life.
Right.
Maybe I didn't say that as well as I could have, but I just feel like,
to try to evaluate your own sense of stigma, one of the things that I say to people is that if you've talked in an age appropriate way to your own children about the vulnerabilities that maybe your mother faced, or you faced, or your sister or brother faced, or, that, gosh, your Uncle Adam has anxiety, mom has anxiety, I get really nervous about things, and your grandfather. I mean, if you just talk about it openly and say, well, what's anxiety? Well, that's when you feel this, and you describe it just like you would, how do you know if you have the flu?
Right. Right.
And so you, again, will use the word normalize it for them, but you give them some language. And then the fact that you have talked about it means they're much more likely to come to you when they feel that. But and it's not guaranteed, but hopefully they would.
Yeah. And I also think that I like the advice of staying curious. So, I think a mistake that I might have made is if somebody, and I'm not saying like it's a mistake that I think I shut down conversations because I assumed that I knew what they were saying, and so there have been times when, I don't know, I can't think of a good example, but if somebody were to, if your child were to say, it's just too hard. Okay, well, what's hard? Like, I know what hard means. And I know, what does it mean to you? Like, what is hard? Help me understand. Like, keep asking more questions until you drill down into the thing. Mm-hmm. And maybe it turns out to be nothing, but I certainly won't when you say, no, you can do hard things. So go get them, like, well, tell me what's hard, what is it? What's another word that you would use besides hard? Like, can you say it in a different way? And like, to really get a picture of what this thing is that they're describing, and not what you evoke in your mind, but how it's playing out in theirs. Yeah. That's what I think. And just staying curious, right? Like, I'm not going to jump to any conclusion about what hard is. You tell me, like, what's going on, and then let them paint that picture for you. And then even just keep continuing to ask questions like, wow, like, what do you need from me? Like, what do you think would be helpful for you right now? Like, sometimes we think of like, well, I'm the parent, so I'm here to fix it. So if you're feeling like that, then we should go get some ice cream and, whatever, right? Like, maybe they have a different idea. Like, mm-hmm. But, and I think kids have a lot of insight that we don't really give them credit for. They're thinking in their heads, and they're watching and listening and trying to figure stuff out. So what are they coming to? Like, let's dig a little deeper, get in there, find out. Yeah. And even for our young kids, they're really perceptive, and thoughtful. So
great advice. Erin, thank you so much.
I hope. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. And so I think we, assume that we know our kids and he or she would never feel that way or something. And
right.
We don't. They are growing into little people all their own.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing your story, Jay's story, your family's story.
Of course.
Thank you very, very, very much.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Margaret. I know it took us a while to figure this out, but I'm really, really glad we've had this conversation.
I know I got emotional in talking with Erin. She is a warm, loving, caring, and obviously a person who is willing to be scrutinized by others in order to do what really is the honorable thing. And that is to try to determine what she learned, what we can learn from her son's death and her son's life. Thank you so much, Erin. Thank you all for being here. I'm always honored by the time you take to listen into SelfWork. You can reach me at askdrmargaret@drmargaretrutherford.com or leave me a SpeakPipe message. Again, thank you. Take very good care of yourself, of your loved ones, and your community. I'm Dr. Margaret, and this has been SelfWork.